Hey, no intro. Let's start.
Language often falls short for many of us. And we sometimes refer to a foreign language to try to explain something. Why is it that my thinking process or my experiential process cannot be articulated with language? Where is that disconnect?
Well, each language has, first of all, I think altogether, I think all of us know that language does not give us the full capacity, maybe anywhere near the capacity to express what we're thinking, feeling, hoping for, whatever. There's an awful lot of thought that goes on that just doesn't come out the mouth, and probably can't. I mean, when you introspect, you can see this. So, for example, here's a topic that hasn't been studied, but should. People are talking to themselves all the time. You can't prevent yourself from talking to yourself. Actually, I don't know if that's true of signers. Do signers sign to themselves all the time? All the time, yeah. Okay. But you've seen it. Yeah. Well, you just can't prevent yourself from doing it. It takes a tremendous act of will. Now, if you pay attention, at least when I pay attention to what I think I'm doing, it is externalized language, like I can tell whether two words rhyme, but I think it's fragments. I mean, at least what I think I'm doing is sort of fragments come to mind, a word, another word, and all of a sudden I know exactly what the thought is, and I can express it. Well, if that's true, that means that the thinking is going on. The bits of externalized language are kind of spurring you to express it, and then you can express whatever it is you're thinking. But even with all of that, there's a lot of stuff you just can't express. That's why people write poems, and that's why we have literature and art and music and all sorts of other things. And that does something, but not enough. As for looking at other languages, there are sometimes concepts that do have a kind of the mot juste, the right word. It happens like that. Happens to be in another language. It doesn't happen to be an expression of English. And there are things like that, schadenfreude, angst and stuff like that. So there are cases where some other language just happens to have the concept that you're looking for. But there are plenty of cases where, at least my feeling is, where no language does. And we just can't begin to exhaust the content of our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on. I think everybody knows this from their own experience.
I can definitely relate to what he just said there. Sometimes I can't find the word to describe what I'm thinking. I've mentioned in previous videos that I like languages, both to speak and as a hobby to learn. All of my speaking life, I've been bilingual, English and Spanish, as is a whole side of my family. And I find while speaking to them, we're mostly mixing both languages in conversation. But individual word choices comes from which language the word sounds better, or delivers meaning closest to the emotion we're trying to convey. And I suppose that decision-making is done in a split second, just to keep up the pace of conversation. And I notice that happens quite a lot. The majority of my friends are also bilingual or polyglot. And every so often, a word comes up that can't be translated into the common language we're using. For example, if someone says something in Portuguese that I've never heard, and I ask what that means, and they say, oh, there isn't a word for that in English, or it takes a string of words to explain that concept in English. It is quite curious because it really illustrates how language can limit thought. I know a lot of you speak another language, so if you have a word that doesn't translate exactly into English or vice versa, please drop it down below. I'd love that.
It's not studied much. One of the reasons it's not studied is because of the pervasiveness of certain dogmas, like the kinds I mentioned, that nothing can be going on unless you're conscious of it, or at least you can become conscious of it. That's a very deep-seated conviction in philosophy and psychology. I mean, I've looked, maybe some of you know better, but I can find almost nothing in the history of thought that raised the question that there are unconscious thoughts. And incidentally, that includes Freud. There's debate about this, but as far as I read Freud, I think when he talks about the unconscious, I don't think he means by it inaccessible to consciousness. In fact, the whole technique of psychoanalysis wouldn't make sense on that assumption. So it's as if it's there somehow and you can bring it to consciousness. But the idea that there's something, that the stuff going on that is completely unconscious, that's rarely discussed. I mean, there's some in Jung, there's some in Vico, but not much. And I suspect that this bears on current work that's being done. There was some very interesting work that came out recently. Some of you will remind me, I forgot the name of the experimenter, which was all publicized all over the place. Someone found that before you make a decision, let's say to lift your hand, there's something going on in the motor cortex that would be connected with lifting your hand. I forget who the guy was who did this. This was interpreted all over the place as being an argument against freedom of will. It isn't that at all. All it's saying is that decisions are unconscious.
Interesting. That makes me want to read more Freud, so I'll have to write that down. But at least for me, it illustrates why free speech is so important. Because if certain words are not allowed to be said, and then future generations grow up without exposure to those words, they wouldn't be able to articulate certain concepts and thoughts, which in theory, I hope, comes from a good place, but the ramifications of that could easily become problematic. I have absolutely no scientific base for what I'm about to say. It's just an observation based off of anecdotal evidence for me. But I have seen a correlation between the ability to speak multiple languages and creativity. And I wonder if it's because the more words in somebody's Rolodex, the more open their range of thought could be. And of course, creativity comes in many ways, not just through that. That's just a hypothesis. I'll have to read more about that, but I'll let you know. Anyway, regardless of how you feel about Noam Chomsky, as with Thomas Sowell or Jordan Peterson, you don't have to agree with everything that somebody says to find value in them. And he is a very well-versed linguist. If you want to read more about his thoughts on language, he literally has a book called On Language. So I'll link that for you in the bio below. Or if you want to explore his political beliefs, he does have a book called Manufacturing Consent that I think is relevant still today. It explores how the media went from seeking truth and justice to defending the social, political, and economic beliefs that best suit them. You don't say. I think there is an audiobook version of that on YouTube, so if I can find it, I'll link it in the bio as well. He started off this segment speaking about how people are constantly talking to themselves. I certainly do. Do you? You'll let me know. Was this one a bit too nerdy? Anyway, thanks for watching with me. Preview.